This is Turning Round Uganda, the alternative policy series, coming up on the program.
When there is overpopulation, there is immediate pressure on the natural resources and the environment.
A huge population, a big population itself is a resource. Poverty, everybody has talked about poverty, but what is poverty?
Wetland is the easiest natural system to recover, the easiest. You remove the interfering objective, the wetland comes back.
There is really need to put the polluters to task.
Uganda embraces many ecosystems, from the tall volcanic mountains to the swampy Choga Valley, the mighty River Nile, and the central rainforest of Mabida. The land is richly fertile. However, environmental degradation due to human activity is threatening the very existence of this ecosystem.
We occupy a very particular space that is so rich, so good, so beautiful. If you look at Africa as a termite mound, you consider Africa as a termite mound. Uganda sits on the top of the termite mound. That's why you see the River Congo going that way, River Nile going this way, and because we are at the top of what we call the East African Plateau. And we have got such a good environment. And that's why our economy is almost dependent on environment and natural resources. You look at tourism, look at agriculture, look at fisheries, look at all sorts of things that we get, apart from the oil that we got recently, but we have not seen any results. Otherwise, we are dependent on the good environment that we have. And therefore, clearing any natural vegetation directly affects production in our country.
50 years after independence, Uganda has one of the highest population growth rates in the world at 3.4%, a rate which puts the country on track to nearly double the population over the next 2 decades.
In the short run, it is a challenge. And it is a challenge because our population is growing from births, that is from natural increase. That is, there are more births in the population than either deaths or people migrating out. So that is a big challenge because that means that our age structure, the age structure of our population is full of children who are dependents. They are not productive. So it's very difficult to think of production and which will eventually lead to development with that kind of age structure.
In 1948, Uganda had a total population of 5 million people, which increased to 6.5 million in 1959, then to 9.5 in 1969, then to 12.6 in 1980, to 16.7 in 1991, to 24.4 in 2002. The population total in Uganda was last reported at 34.5 million people in 2011.
Any country should grow. But the pace at which it grows means it has implications for the management of its resources. If it has reasonable resources and they are being managed very well, clearly it can benefit from its population. However, if you have an economy that is still small, and I want to submit that the Uganda's economy is growing but is still small by any standards, then a rapidly growing population becomes a challenge, and it calls for solutions along those lines. And so leaders must contend with what they do for their people when you have such a high population growth rate.
Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni for a long time was pro-growth policy in the belief that a larger population means a larger market and more economic growth.
A huge population, a big population itself is a resource. So I want to be very clear on that. The issue is at what rate is your population growing compared to your resources? And that is the real difference in these matters. When you have a population, the bigger it is, the more educated they are, the more skills, the more employed people are, the better for you. They drive the economy and the economy grows. But if so happens that these people are also poor, then you are really not having an advantage in that regard. Or if the population growth rate outstrips your economic growth, then again you are in a big problem. So the argument should be contextualized, and any country would like to see a bigger working population,
a population that has jobs, has skills, that makes savings, that those savings are reinvested in the economy, and that way the economy booms. Currently, Uganda is facing tremendous challenges of making adequate provision for its growing population. And I also want to quote more recently the Minister of Finance herself, Honorable Maria Chiwanuka, was able to say that yes, we have challenges of our rapidly growing population. There is pressure on infrastructure, schools, health facilities, housing, environment, water, but also to make sure that people have enough food and they can afford it. It is these challenges are there, and Uganda is in the thick and thin of it. And I think this is where we need to contextualize the whole concept of population growing in this country.
In the past, populations and resources coexisted because of sustainable consumption. This is not the case today. The population is putting pressure on the available natural resources, affecting the environment and weather patterns.
We still have sufficient resources as Ugandans to live off. But what has happened is that we have not realized that we can no longer live in extravagancy, that we need to plan better. We need to be able to optimize on the resources that we have. It's not as if we've run out of resources, but we are not sustainably utilizing the resources that we have. That is what has happened. It's as if the population has been growing, oblivious of degradation, oblivious of the decrease in the resources on which we are depending, and we have continued to live the same lifestyles as if we have a lot more than like we used to have.
More than 80% of Ugandans rely directly upon land, agriculture and fishing for their livelihoods. But environmental indicators reveal trends of degrading agricultural lands, soil erosion, deforestation, drainage of wetlands, loss of biodiversity, and increased pollution.
We are in a natural resource-based economy. We depend on the land. We depend on the forests. About 90% of Ugandans use fuel wood, either as charcoal or as firewood. So we don't realize when you're cooking your food or when you're eating food in a restaurant, you do not connect that for you to be able to get that food, a tree was cut down. So we are delinked because that's our way of life. So our entire being is based on natural resources. And we are continuing to use 3 stone cook stoves in the villages. We've continued to use metallic cook stoves that use more than twice as much charcoal as you would have used if you were using an improved cook stove. So the technologies exist, but we haven't yet felt the need to switch.
As Uganda's population hit the 33 million mark in 2010, the National Environment Management Authority, NEMA, warned that the country's environment is in danger as much of its forest cover and wetlands are disappearing at an alarming rate. Uganda has lost 26% of its forest cover in the last 2 decades, according to a report released by the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO. FAO said the forest cover had reduced from about 4 million hectares in 1990 to 3 million hectares in 2005.
So it's going faster. And now we are losing it at 90,000 hectares per year. It is estimated that at this rate, within the next 25 years, we are not going to be having any forest in Uganda. In fact, our children will probably study forest in history books because the rate at which we are degrading these areas is very high.
Trees, forests and woodlands cover about 14% of Uganda's land surface. Over the last 50 years, growth in human population and corresponding increase in demand for forest products for domestic and industrial use, expansion of agricultural land, illegal settlements and weak forest management capacity have adversely affected the status of natural forests and biodiversity in Uganda. The impact created by clearing forests cannot be underestimated. Forest loss means the local community loses the regular flow of clean water and the risk of flooding and drought increases. When forest cover is lost, runoff water rapidly flows into the streams, raising river levels and subjecting downstream villages and agriculture fields to flooding during the rainy season.
What has happened is that these forests and wetlands used to cushion us from some of the effects of what would have been. The floods, the excessive rains have always been there. The periods of drought have always been there. But what was happening in the past was that the vegetation cover would buffer us. When you have vegetation cover around you, the runoff is reduced from the rain. The siltation, therefore, is also reduced in the rivers because the soil erosion has been controlled. But also, even when there is a drought, because there is vegetation around you, the ability of the soils to retain moisture are better than when you don't have forests around you. So what has happened is that we have left ourselves exposed. We've cleared the forests, we've cleared the wetlands, and we have decreased on their ability to provide those environmental services that they used to give us.
Forests are the rainmakers. In the water cycle, moisture is transpired through plant leaves and evaporated into the atmosphere, forming rain clouds before precipitating as rain back into the forest. The reverse is true. When forests are cut down, less moisture is evapotranspired into the atmosphere, resulting in the formation of fewer or no clouds. Subsequently, there's a decline in rainfall, subjecting the area to drought.
If you look at the forestry sector, having lost more than 60% of forestry that we used to have, it means the water catchment, the water attraction has all gone down. So we've got less water. Now, if I've got less water, then look downstream. What are you doing downstream? The dams, electricity production, is going to go down because we don't have enough water. You must remember the arguments with the engineers arguing about Ujagali. How much power can we actually produce? And some say, no, at high peak we can produce this one. At low peak we can produce this one. In a dry season we can produce this one. We cannot determine how much electricity we can produce with these dams because we cannot estimate clearly how much water we can receive at different times of the year. And if you don't have therefore enough energy production, you don't have enough electricity, then you're talking about problems everywhere in all other economic sectors. So you remember when I told you about connecting systems? So you are degrading a wetland, you are degrading a forest, you don't realize that actually Mukwano is being affected, despite that he's not in Gwenzoli, he's not in Mabira, he's not in those places. Because his industry is going to be dependent on this water that's come from up there. But even the little that now comes from these hills is completely silted. Estimates show that even Lake Victoria has been silted, has been polluted, and therefore it can no longer be as productive as it used to be. So, less water, less clean water, less fish. So the fish industry is going to be affected. But even producing water that we drink in our pipes becomes a problem. National Water and Sewage Corporation estimates that their costs of water distribution has increased more than 4 times because they need to use a lot more money to clean the water than they used to do before. Why? Because of pollution, because of sanitation. Okay? And the consequence is that you're going to pay more. Because if they increase the cost of water production, then they are going to put the cost on you, the consumer.
In Uganda, wetlands occupy about 13% of the country's total area. If we take the Kampala area as an example, the area occupied by the Mukwano Industries, Lugogo Trade Show Grounds, Kitante Golf Club, Nakawa Industrial Area, Owino Market Area, Luzira Bugolobi, and Munyonyo Recreation Grounds were all wetlands.
30% of wetlands have been lost in the last 20 years. So we are doing very badly. And this is not only restricted to wetlands or forests, it is also applying to rivers that are silting, to lakes that are, silting, being, overfished, overexploited. So we are not doing well in terms of environmental conservation. But the most worrying part is that the people who are supposed to help in prevention of this degradation are maybe and most likely the people who are involved or causing the degradation. If you see wetlands being degraded all around Kampala, and we have got the Ministry of Water and Environment and National Environment Management Authority with directors and all these people, they're all around and watching and looking. And when we get a small shower, we get a flood in Bugais or elsewhere, and we start complaining. People even blame climate change. Just poor leadership and governance of these resources is probably the major cause of environmental degradation in our country.
This is Rosebud Limited in Entebbe, a flower enterprise belonging to city tycoon Sudiru Parelia. Rosebud is the country's largest exporter of flowers. The greenhouses cover a total of 36 hectares and 6 more hectares are under construction.
Ogwo gwali mwalo nnyabo ng'abantu bavubako byennyanja. Naye batandika okuyiwako ettaka wali n'abavubi ne babasalako nga tebakyakola ki? Tebakyayingirayo. Tetukyasobola kufuna kukava. Kati mmwe mulaba wano naye ate emmotoka muziraba nti nnyingi ku kkubo okwo naye ziyiwa emirundi egi. Bayiwa wano bayiwa n'eri. Sayidi eri oba mumanyiyo nayo bayiwayo ettaka mu luseera okutuuka ku Namugonde wali essomero ly'ebata Namugonde eri eyo nayo yonna bayiwayo ki ettaka.
Recently there was a standoff between the locals and Rosebud.
Ekitwewuunyisa nti n'abannema bajja ne bayingira mu kampuni omwo ne tulowooza nti oba bajja kwogera nabo baki oba ki. Naye bwe bavaawo era basigala bayiwa ettaka. N'owulira nti baminisita bazze abakwatagana ndowooza ne ku by'obutonde buno obw'entobazi. N'olowooza nti oba n'abeerawo ekikolebwa naye era bantu tusigala tulaba nga bakyayiwa ettaka mu ki? Mu nnyanja. Kyekyo nakunyonyodde nti ffe omuntu wa bulijjo bw'oba weekubira enduulu naye n'olaba ng'ate gye weekubira enduulu poliisi yejja ne bakamyufu. Ekitegeeza gwe omuntu wa bulijjo oba tokyalina kyakola ki? Abandi badde batuyamba babasangawo ne babakwata bukwasi ne babatwala ne babasiba. Olaba ne chairman wa district bamusalirako ewuwe kubanga y'omu yali alwanyisa ku by'olutobazi luno baleme luyiwa mu ttaka. Bwanika chairman we Wakiso ndozo mumanyi baamuwamba wali ewuwe n'abavubuka abaaliwo abalala ne babakwata ne bakola ki? Ne babasiba.
The environment is being polluted by toxic pesticides such as carbendazim, hydrochloride, forstyl carboxym to mention but a few. In this highly complex interconnected system, the effect of such exposures is not fully understood. In fact, some effects of these products don't often manifest for years. However, there are some immediate effects that the locals have already started feeling.
Ettaka eryo libayiwa mu nnyanja. Amazzi tegakyalina gye galaga. Ffe nga bw'otulaba tukolera wano tuli mu kiwonvu oba ekiwonvu oba okitegeera nti sayidi ne sayidi wali akasozi. Kati amazzi bwe gajja gayiika wano we tukolera so luli twalinga tukozesa pampu ogasinamu ne tugayiwa sayidi zeeno gye bayiwa ettaka amazzi ne gagenda mu nnyanja naye kati bwe bayiwa eri ettaka mu nnyanja ne bwe tufuna pampu ne tuyiwayo amazzi gakola ki? Gakomawo bukomi. Ne twesanga ng'ate n'eddagala lye bakozesa okuva mu bimuli eno nalyo lidda buziwa wano wennyini. Kati oluzzi lwe tukozesa lwe luli wali baluyita Nansamba. Luno olwaffe enzidi ezedde ez'okufukamira wansi n'osena amazzi ga nsulo. Kati ekitegeeza nti tunywa kemiko yonna evaawa. Ffe twali tusaba kuba tetukyasobola bayimiriza naye batukolere bbowa. Ate n'ekirala eddagala lino wano tewakyaliwo kitulima ne kidda. Kajibe emiyembe ogiraba ovakado eddagala enjuki zonna ezaali zituyamba ku bibala ebyo zadduka.
In Uganda, if you plant beans, you just throw beans and peas out there and you expect they're going to grow. Even coffee, you just go and put these seedlings outside and then you expect they're going to get coffee after probably about 2 years. But who is actually making this coffee produce the seeds? It's a simple animal called the honeybee. Where in Uganda do you have a project conserving honeybee in the landscape? If you have no pollination, you're not going to have peas, you're not going to have beans, you're not going to have groundnuts, you're not going to have coffee. We have conducted research here at Nature Uganda and found that if you exclude the honeybee from a coffee farm, you lose 50% of the coffee.
There are those activities that are not allowed in a wetland. For example, putting there a flower farm, use the chemicals, and those chemicals are dangerous to the biodiversity, to the fish, to the birds, to the bees. You know, with bees, if you kill the bees, then you will not have our flowers, our crops pollinated, and then we shall not get seeds, we shall not get food, and we shall die of hunger. What that means is that we are not promoting sustainable development.
Lake Victoria is the largest tropical freshwater lake in the world. It is an important source of food and water for the East African region. Increased human activity in agriculture and industry around the lake has led to increases in dumping of industrial waste into the lake and surrounding water bodies. The fish stock in Lake Victoria has been cut in half because of the dumping of toxic chromium, phosphorus and nitrogen in the lake. The toxic waste leads to high concentrations of ammonia, which depletes the water of oxygen and suffocates the fish.
The fishery in Uganda, before it went where it is now, was contributing substantially to our economy, because people are selling fish, people are eating fish and whatever. Those are environmental resources. But any disturbance, you look at how the fish, most of the water bodies are stagnant, no fish. People think it's because of catching small fish. No, the science tells us because of the change in the environment. Particularly, let's look at the swamps. The swamps is where some of the fish used to come and breed. You remove the breeding place, so we don't produce, and we finish. And then the fish goes out. So you interfere with the natural patterns of nature, and then you get that result. What you're also learning is that the fish are surviving. Instead of producing and allowing the eggs to stay there, they now have to keep the eggs in the mouth after fertilization until they are ready to come out.
We have a series of instruments, including regulations for managing waste. And of course, you can find a couple of other instruments even in other areas. So the issue right now is really an issue of enforcement and compliance. Now, I keep on arguing that I think that as a country, we've become a lawless country. I think as a people, the majority of the population, the majority of the people here, especially the elite, the politicians, I think that these people spend more time and money trying to either break or circumvent the law than to comply.
There is really need to put the polluters to task. There is no reason why a factory X should continue producing and pouring all its untreated waste direct into a river, direct into a lake. Nobody benefits from that. I don't even know what they've done to the authorities to be able to be allowing them to do such things. So nobody benefits from that. And in the same way as we work with companies abroad and they estimate their footprint, these companies should also, an audit should be done on them, an environmental audit should be done on them. They identify the practices that really they need to stop, and then earmark those ones that maybe are inevitable, but then put a value to it, whereby that value contributes to a fund that will be able to support the people that are able to clean up the environment to use to clean up.
While all this is happening, Rosebud continues to produce flowers at the expense of workers and nature. So we ask, what is the mandate of NEMA, the National Environmental Management Authority?
It is not regulating the use of the environment. It is not helping the communities how to use the environment. And I think it is no longer supporting the sustainable development in this country. We need to get an alternative probably for NEMA. Or if NEMA has to wake up now, let it do it now. Because otherwise, at this trend, we have a big problem, and this country is going to be finished. There is a report done actually by NEMA that in the next 20 years, if we remain at this degradation of the forests, we shall have no forest cover in this country. Nothing. In the next 20 years from now. So you can see that kind of trend. but then NEMA now is just looking on. To me, that is an indicator that it is just a sleeping giant. It is not giving technical advice to the politicians, to parliament, to the cabinet, and to the population.
Uganda has some of the best environmental policies. When usually, occasionally, people come up with plans, maybe we need to review the laws or the policies that we have. But even when we go through a period of review, we discover that the laws are nearly perfect. They are almost perfect. But it has really been on the implementation of the law. I don't know whether we are a lawless society, we do not respect laws, because you find even when people are knowledgeable, they blatantly just ignore the laws and contravene them and fill a wetland, fill a lake, chop down the trees and do whatever you want. So one thing that baffles me is that where is the authority? Where is where are the institutions that are responsible for policing, for implementing these policies and the laws? Okay, so these people do some of these things in broad daylight and nothing comes to them. So where are the incentives for the rest of the people not to do likewise?
Despite the establishment of the National Environmental Management Authority and the National Forestry Authority as governmental agencies responsible for implementation of environmental systems of control, low expenditure on the environment and forestry has contributed to their deterioration.
We have a major problem with our institutions. I think for all intents and purposes, the government has really not helped the situation because it hasn't built the institutions. You know institutions that are confident, that are responsible, that have authority, that are coordinated, and that are accountable to each other. So when you go in the environment and natural resources sector, you look for, okay, so which is the institution that is the leader in this area? Almost every institution is the leader, and therefore nobody is a leader. Everybody is accountable, therefore nobody is accountable. So you really see that there is if we sit down to list the number of institutions that the government has created in the environment and natural resources sector, you have a checklist of so many of these. But when you begin to say, okay, what are they capable of doing? Then you realize they have major limitations, mainly because of lack of clarity of mandate, or even not being given the confidence, because the confidence of institutions come from the political leadership. The institutions have to feel like they have the political cover to be able to do their technical work. When the politicians sometimes focus they focus on verifying these institutions, then the institutions begin to be timid. They even fear taking the simplest of decisions because they don't know the political consequences of taking those decisions.
The National Environmental Management Authority has an environment police force that is supposed to enforce environmental laws and policies.
When you hear Mabira is going to be given away, it is only now you and me who are saying, no, please stop. We cannot do this. The people who are degrading all these wetlands around Kampala are not our local communities. These are the well-to-do families, the well-to-do people who can even go and hire the police that is supposed to be guarding these areas to go and guard degradation. You see where the problem is? Somebody goes and hires police to go and protect people who are degrading a wetland. You go and hire the police to go with you in the forest to cut down the forest. So do you blame my mom if she can follow suit? Can I give you an example? When this Rubiji was invaded by communities, you remember? That's about a year ago. Now, who invaded the Rubiji first? It was the National Water and Sewage Corporation, building a sewage treatment plant within the wetland, within in the middle of the wetland that takes drainage out of the city, and it's still now being constructed. Now, the people said, okay, fine, if you have taken that side of the wetland, let's also take the other what? The other opposite side. And the government, of course, brought in the police and kicked these guys out of the wetland. National Water is still building this wetland. Do you know the consequence? Every time you get a small shower, you get Bugaise flooded. You don't need a storm. A small shower, Bugaise is flooded because water is trapped. It cannot move. The road, the bypass, which was constructed about 3-4 years ago, now it is overflooded. They are now rebuilding it to allow water to flow. And it's not going to happen because the water has been stopped. So, our civil servants, our politicians, must stop betraying our country. If they want us to move forward, they need a complete overhaul and attitude change. To look at things not in a selfish way, but are things important for the country. The reason these things are happening is because National Water was supposed to have land outside the wetland. I don't know what happened to the money that was allocated for that. Instead, they connived with the National Environment Management Authority and got a certificate for use of the wetland. I mean, we have got engineers and all these fantastic experts in this country. What were they doing? Why did they do that? So unless our civil servants and our politicians get a positive view of how this country should develop, we are going to continue having these problems. You cannot dissociate environment degradation, environment conservation from governance of the country, from administration, from corruption. You cannot dissociate, it's all connected.
The increasing population requires increased food production and energy, putting undue pressure on land cover. This means more trees cut down for charcoal and firewood and more dams constructed along the mighty River Nile. When Turning Round Uganda returns, we find out what the alternative policy for sustainable development will be. As Uganda searches for ways to manage its forests, state-centered policies appear to have failed in most Ugandan forests. The cost of maintaining a top-down institutional arrangement necessary to protect forestry resources are far too high. The alternative policies therefore center around understanding the interaction between population and environmental variables to help develop holistic strategies for sustainable human development.
We have to look at our livelihood strategies. One of the things we need to realize is that even our own livelihoods are threatened by the way we manage the environment. Once we realize that, we need to develop livelihood strategies that cushion us, build our resilience to the effect of, for example, effects of climate change, but also those same activities, those livelihood strategies that are more positive to the environment.
Improving the environment means a couple of things. One is that you can do what is called environmental restoration. Environmental restoration policies focus on restoring degraded ecosystems. Ecosystems like forest ecosystems, like wetland ecosystems, like lakes. You know, lakes, there are some lakes in this country which are almost dying slowly. So as a government, you take restoration actions.
Wetland is the easiest natural system to recover. The easiest. You remove the interfering object, the wetland comes back. Through natural regeneration, it just needs time. And the wetland will be back. For some reasons, some of the wetlands have been issued. People have owned land titles in wetland, which is contrary to the Constitution of 1995, where wetlands are among the natural resources which government takes responsibility. So what we are doing with the wetlands now, first of all, we want to protect, to prevent further encroachment. That's the drive now. If we can prevent further encroachment, particularly the one which changes the ecological functions, settlements, okay? The wetlands up country where they are growing rice and whatever, we want to regulate how they, to the extent under which they utilize the wetlands. So, and you see, those wetlands, when we have enough rains, people don't go there. the wetland comes back. So there's no problem.
Make it costly for any citizen, no matter who you are, whether you are president, whether you are a minister, whether you are an LC5 chairperson, whether you are an ordinary citizen like me, make it costly for that person to break the law, circumvent the law. So that again can be you know, an intervention that you make to improve the environment.
We use the very laws, the very policies, the very regulations, and we use the courts of law. You take those institutions to court, you take those companies to court, so that our courts can tell those groupings to restore. If, for example, NEMA has issued a permit for some activities to be done in a wetland that are not allowed, so courts will tell NEMA to revoke those permits, to stop those permits. And they can also ask those companies to restore the wetlands.
There are also policies that, you know, make that create inclusion, because in some cases you find that some of the actions that we do as a government, they exclude people. So people actually protest by destroying the environment. But in some of the areas like water bodies, like wildlife, you can take actions related to benefit sharing, for example, relating to compensation, that the citizens feel included. They feel like, oh, they have an interest in protecting these resources. We've had this discussion with the protected areas.
Empower the communities, the people, so that when they see anybody coming to degrade a wetland, to degrade a water resource, to cut the forest like they did for Mabira, the populations can say, no, don't cut this forest. We don't want sugarcane. We want our forest because we want it for a number of purposes. We need it for fuel wood. We need it for building. We need it for air. We need it for rain. We need it for medicines. We need it for tourism. So the population can say, go away. Don't degrade this resource, this forest, this wetland, this water resource. Even oil, in oil areas, they can guide, they can say, mine this well, this one don't touch.
Government can help create conditions to enable Ugandans take informed decisions on how many children they want to raise. Government can also create more jobs to ensure economic growth and development, and population growth rate will inevitably reduce.
I am informing government first and foremost because governments are elected to precisely do these things. But there is the private sector, which has a very important role to play. In this case, they are the ones who are going to be the drivers of development, of economy. They are the ones who provide jobs. The government doesn't provide so much of the jobs, but government must put in place environmental policies. It must put in place urban planning. It must put in place how you manage your rural-urban migrations, how you do your industrialization, which obviously is it planned. So government takes first, it is the first takes the call. But after that, obviously private sector and other civil society organizations. But the message is very clear to all, but first and foremost to government.
Government needs to be able to take policy actions that actually move away people from agriculture. And what kind of actions are we talking about? One is that we have to invest in building future cities. And these are cities that are organized with appropriate infrastructure, and people are then able to move into organized urban settlements. Secondly, I think that government would have to invest strategically in education, because experience has shown that people who get an education are unlikely to go back to till the land. They go into new forms of economic production. But you see, there then you have to provide quality education. You don't rely on the UPE business, because UPE is for creating mass literacy and build maybe the foundation for economic transformation. But the people who are going to move away from agriculture are those who get a quality education, and they become new talent and move into new forms of economic activity.
A balance should be struck between environmental protection, conservation and development initiatives for an adequately forested ecosystem, sustainable and economically prosperous country. A greater commitment by government and more financial support is required to manage and conserve Uganda's forests.
So even when we are proud of our private sector, as long as we continue not to have a good institution of government, even that one will fail. Because the environment in which it's going to be working on is not conducive enough for them to play their part. So we shall still need the institution of government to do its part. So that's why we're saying we are failing. We would have said, scrap it off. No, we cannot do that. We are saying we are failing. You need to improve on this. You need to improve on that. You need to improve on this. I'm sure this is why there is this discussion. I'm sure that's why you're interested in this discussion. Because you want to know where is the problem and how can we, solve that problem.
The best option is to make sure that you have a population whose consumption patterns depend less on extraction of nature, and the economy is able is more oriented towards value addition, because you see, you can have a big population, but you have water purification technologies that allow you to reuse water and you reuse it again and again and again. You can have a big population, but you have technologies that generate charcoal that you can reuse in your charcoal stove, even if you don't have access to power. You don't have to go and cut down a tree every time you have to cook food. You can have quality populations that do not have to go and do shifting cultivation and subsistence agriculture, which is low output. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is that the first priority, I think, for government is to control population growth to a manageable level. But even when the population is increasing, you need to be able to pursue policies that actually help change the consumption patterns that move the population from depending on extraction of nature, so that you optimize the services that you get from any unit of nature that you use, whether it is water, whether it is land, whether it is wildlife. You can be able to optimize the unit that you get from nature. So I think that's for me the bottom line. But otherwise, where we are now as a country, and I think even as a sub-region, doing business as usual is very dangerous. I keep on saying that the fact that government has failed to actually secure effective compliance and law enforcement is basically acquiescing in a slow process of committing suicide that we're involved in as a people.
That is all we had time for in this episode of Turning Round Uganda, the Alternative Policy Series. For comments and suggestions on how to sustainably use the environment for development, post something on our Facebook page. The name is Turning Round Uganda. So long, everybody.